That's the sound of my dog scraping his dish across the floor. Noisiest eater in the world. We should probably wait till he's finished. Filming in the bedroom today because my office is pure chaos. There is stuff absolutely everywhere and I'm not even going to attempt to move it to one side and film just the clean bits because I don't think it's physically possible. The reason my office is such a mess right now is twofold. One, because I am currently building a brand new cat wall for my kitty cats, which you know if you're following my personal Instagram. If you're not, shameless plug, come follow me. This is where I do all the stories about what's going on with the cats and the dogs and other stuff. I won't raise your hopes by saying it's a fun time, but it's a time, it's a thing that exists. Anyway, I'm building a cat wall, but I am also taking apart one of my old cages that I don't need anymore. Well, old cages. It's not really an old cage. I'm dismantling the dropper and the watch glass cage, which is a combination cage, but I only built it in what, October, November last year? It wasn't that long ago. It's my newest cage and I'm taking it apart. I posted about that in my Instagram story and got several messages from different people asking, why am I taking it apart? Why? You just built this cage. Why are you taking it apart? What's going on? Anytime I build a new cage or upgrade a cage or dismantle a cage, I always get the same set of questions being asked. So I figured might as well make a video addressing all of them at once. So first thing I'm going to address is why I'm currently dismantling a cage that I only built a few months ago. And that is simply because I don't need that cage anymore. That's the long and short of it. There's no big explanation behind that. I just don't need it anymore. The only reason I even built that cage was because I agreed to adopting hydrogen and ammonia and I didn't have another enclosure that was going to be suitable for dwarfs to live in. At the time we still had nitrogen who was living in the petri dish cage and that's my dwarf enclosure, and the only other enclosures I had were my mouse cage, which is definitely not suitable for a hamster to live in. That's the test tube, the 3-level one, and the beaker, which I designed for a Syrian, and all the shelving in there is just too far apart and too dangerous for a dwarf to live in. So neither of my 2 empty cages were suitable for a dwarf, and so I had to build 2 new enclosures. So I made the 2 new cages as simple and as affordable as I could because I knew I wasn't gonna have them forever. They were not long-term cages. Had I not agreed to adopting hydrogen and ammonia, those cages wouldn't have ever existed because I had no plans to actually get 2 more dwarfs anyway. And they lived quite happily in those cages for a little while up until when nitrogen passed away, which left the petri dish empty, and I decided that ammonia would benefit from the extra space that enclosure offers. So I moved him out of that cage and into the petri dish. So he moved out, which left the watch glass, the top cage, empty, and hydrogen was still living in the dropper, the bottom cage, up until she passed in February. And since hydrogen passed away, both of those cages have been completely empty and completely unused, and I have no plans to get any more residents for them because I'm very content with what I had beforehand. I have 1 dwarf enclosure, 1 Syrian enclosure, and 1 mouse enclosure, and I'm happy with that. And that's what I'm going back to. Again, it's not a particularly complicated explanation as to why I'm dismantling a cage I only built a few months back. It's just a case of I built it for a purpose and it's no longer needed for that purpose, therefore it's no longer needed. That being said though, the materials used to make that enclosure are very much needed. I've already used some of the materials to go into making the new cat wall. I'm also going to be using some of the wood to make some new shelving and stuff for the beaker cage and possibly some more stuff for the mouse enclosure, don't know yet. But yeah, all that material is really useful and there's no point in it just sitting around doing nothing when I have no plans to use those cages as cages again. So as for the other questions I get, I noticed that a lot of people seem to be confused about when and why I build new enclosures and the difference between me building a new enclosure and upgrading an existing enclosure, because every time I do an upgrade or I do a build, people ask, well, you know, what happened to that other cage? Why don't you have that one anymore? Why don't you have this one anymore? When I do still have those cages. Somebody also asked why I always build new enclosures for every new animal, which I don't. I'm not sure where that question came from. I do, however, upgrade enclosures a lot and make changes to them in between residents. So I think maybe that's where the confusion has come in, because when I have an animal living in a cage for their entire lifetime, I am bound to see things in that cage during that time that could be changed, they could be improved, things that I could just experiment with. And so when the animal passes away and I've got that space of time in between them and a new resident, I usually take that opportunity to make changes and make improvements and make things better. I think I've upgraded the Petri dish between every single resident it's ever had, because it started off, it was originally the Billy cage. It had a different name because it was made out of IKEA Billy bookshelf extensions, and that one was originally made for Amelais, who was a very elderly, very frail hamster who needed a much smaller enclosure than she had been living in. She'd been in the Detolf, and I made the single Billy cage for her. And when she passed away, I turned it into the double Billy, and then I moved Potassium, who was our newest hamster at the time, he moved into that. And then while he was living in it, I also turned it into the Billy XL, which is the one that it is now, basically. Then when he eventually passed away, I upgraded the lid, because the lid was originally flat and annoyed the heck out of me, and I upgraded it to that big domed lid that it has now with the swing open door, which I love that lid so much. And then when Nitrogen passed away, I built all new shelving for the inside. We did that quite recently, actually. Did all the new shelving for the inside and the ramps and the ladders and things like that. And then Ammonia moved into it, and that's how it is now. So the Petri dish gets the most upgrades. But the test tube as well. I built the test tube originally as 3 separate enclosures, which originally housed zinc in the top, sulfur in the middle, and osmium in the bottom, and they have all since passed away. And when that enclosure was emptied, I decided that I wanted to turn the whole thing into one single mouse enclosure rather than it just being the top one. And so we did the upgrades for that, and that was last summer, I think. So that has obviously now been upgraded between residents as well. So a lot of the time when you look back and see my old enclosures, they're not necessarily gone, they're just different now. They've had plastic surgery. They have a new identity and they're living much better lives than they used to. But when it comes to actually dismantling cages, people seem to think that I dismantle and get rid of cages a lot, and it's actually kind of rare. I've only got rid of 3 of my DIY cages, and 2 of them I didn't technically get rid of, I just took them apart and reused their materials for other stuff. One of them is the cage that I'm currently taking apart, the watch glass dropper combo. The other one is the Bunsen, which I built in 2017 before I got Iodine. I built it for her. So I built that cage, got her, she moved in. She lived in there for over a year, I think, and then I decided that she could really do with more space. I like that enclosure, I like the concept of that enclosure, but I just felt it could be bigger. And so I built the beaker. So I built the beaker as a replacement for the Bunsen, and I actually had to use parts of the Bunsen to build the beaker. So I've used bits of wood from the old cage to build the new cage, and Iodine moved into that, as mentioned, lived there for her entire life. So the Bunsen was completely dismantled, and all of that wood was used in other projects. In fact, I still have some of that wood. Some of it might be going into the cat tree, possibly. I think there's at least 1 bit of wood that was part of the Bunsen. So that was dismantled in 2018, so a few years ago, and the only other cage that I've actually gotten rid of and not dismantled was the lac cage, which I built in 2013, and I think we got rid of it in, I think 2014 we must have got rid of it, because we moved to this apartment in 2015 and we didn't have it when we moved here. But the reason we had to get rid of the lac was because it got a very nasty wood mite infestation, which was threatening our other wood furniture, and yeah. So we didn't really have a choice with that one, that just had to be thrown. So that was the only DIY cage we've just straight up got rid of, and to be honest, I don't miss it. In retrospect, there are a lot of things I could have done better with that enclosure. So yeah, I've only ever dismantled 2 of my cages, 1 in 2018 and 1 this year. So I don't actually get rid of cages that often. It is quite rare. And with the 3 enclosures I'm now left over with, the Petri dish, the beaker, and the test tube, I'm really happy with those cages. There are definitely some more improvements and changes I could make to them. Maybe not the Petri dish so much. I'm not really sure. I don't know what else I could do to the Petri dish. I'm sure I'll find something. I did consider at one point creating a door in the bottom of it like I did for the test tube, and turning the beaker and the Petri dish into one big enclosure. But I'm not going to do that, because that would mean that I could only have a Syrian living in there. There's no way I'd feel safe putting a dwarf in that. It was an idea, you know, it sprung to mind. Maybe one day, you never know. It's a possible thing. The changes I'm making to the beaker should be happening sometime this year, but they should just be internal changes. I'm just changing up all the shelves and stuff. I love the way the shelves look, but I want to move those, the mushroom shelfy climby things and like the rainbow ladder and stuff. I want to move all of that into my mouse enclosure because heck, it would be cute in a mouse enclosure. And I want to make the inside of the beaker a lot more like the inside of the Bunsen was, which had a lot more shelves and ladders and things to climb, Syrian suitable things to climb, of course. My current plans for the beaker are still very vague. I'm still in the early steps of designing it. I'm just focused on the cat wall right now. But yeah, later this year there'll be something going on with that. Anyway, so hopefully that's addressed those questions and queries once and for all. What happens to my old enclosures? Facelifts mostly. They're all still there, they just look a little different. Anyway, thank you for watching this video all the way through. Hopefully it wasn't too rambly, and I will see you guys whenever I see you. Bye! I hope you're all thoroughly disappointed that there was no lockdown unicorn today, because I am thoroughly disappointed.